quiet in here, doesn't it?
I'd like to call the meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, January 3rd, 2024, and it is 1:46. I want to make a note today that we have two members serving on our commission, Francis Slay and Dan Hageman. We welcome you to your new roles and look forward to working with you. Congratulations. Commission Secretary, please call the roll. Here.
Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. As we move forward with our business today, I have a friendly reminder for all that we are live streaming our open meetings for the public to view from their home or office. If you are speaking, please make sure you speak into a microphone and that the microphone is on so the viewers may hear what is being said. We are going to start our meeting this morning with a brief safety emphasis. Nicole Thompson, Senior Safety Specialist, is going to share with us what we need to do in case of emergency today. Nicole?
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, Director McKenna. Thank you for welcoming me. As you know, we are gearing up for winter weather at MoDOT. I was going to comment on how we've been fortunate this year so far to have such a mild winter, but I just saw where I got an invite to a winter preparedness call for later this week, so I will refrain. As for today, the forecast does show that we are expecting dry and hazard-free weather. But in the event that we need to shelter, this building does have a tornado shelter. It's out these doors, down the center stairwell, and towards the print shop. If we need to evacuate those on stage, the commission director and secretary will leave out the back and through conference room 101 to the sidewalk on Jefferson Street. The audience will exit through the doors to the lobby out the back entrance by the loading dock and proceed to the sidewalk there on Jefferson Street. An alternate exit is down the stairs out the front entrance if you need to exit that way, and then join us at the meeting place there off of Jefferson Street. Please walk up that grassy hill on Jefferson until everyone's out safely out the back. Stay a safe distance away from the building, leaving room for emergency response vehicles. Take a moment to note who is sitting next to you. Check that your buddy has reached that safe location with you. If there is a small fire, we have an extinguisher in the back, and Marty Lyles has agreed to grab it. If there's a medical emergency, Mark Corcoran will call 911 and direct emergency response to our location here at 105 West Capitol Avenue. Becky Almaroth has volunteered to administer CPR, and Eric Schroeder will assist. There is an AED in the hallway of this floor. Tom Blair or myself will retrieve that AED. That concludes our safety minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Our schedule today is a little different as we begin our open meetings with a workshop on the financial forecast update. And with that, I'm going to ask Chief Financial Officer Brenda Morris to begin with a series of presentations. Take it away, Brenda.
Yeah, and I think I'll just proceed a bit, if I may, Mr. Chairman. This financial forecast is one of the most important matters that comes before the commission and the work that the department does each year. I will say that we all feel very fortunate that resources have been made available through the legislative budget process, through the General Assembly, the leadership of the commission, and the governor. And with those additional resources comes additional responsibility and complexity. And I'd say that I am thrilled that we have such a dedicated and competent and excellent financial team here at MoDOT. With Todd Grosvenor and with Brenda Morris and their team throughout the financial services division. They've taken on this challenge of complexity, and they continue to incorporate all the new sources of funds into valid resource proposals and generation of information so that you all can make good financial decisions going forward. So this sets the table for our 5-year capital planning. Subsequent to this meeting, we'll distribute allocations to the districts, and that begins the planning process that will culminate in July with hopefully a commission-approved statewide transportation improvement program. So this is really, it's wonderful to have new commissioners here for this meeting today, and I want to thank both of you for your accommodations to get here on fairly short notice. And but this is a really good exercise to go through, and we look forward to presenting this to you and moving forward with our process this year. So I'll turn it over to Brenda from there. Thank you.
Great. Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, Director McKenna. We're going to be speaking from attachments 1 and 2 as part of your backup in your ebook. That is pages 20 and 24. This is the first step in our process. We use this information to know how much funding can be allocated through the statewide transportation improvement program, or the STIP process, and it's also used to develop our spending plans. The forecast is updated annually and covers a 5-year rolling time period. The forecast that we're presenting today covers only the road and bridge portion. We do forecasts for multimodal as well, but they are much smaller. Some of those components are less predictable, and we will not be presenting those today. The time period we're covering today is from 2025 to 2029. It includes the spending that comes from the State Road Fund, the State Road Bond Fund, and the State Highways and Transportation Department Fund. I would just remind everyone that this is an estimate at a point in time. It's probably the only thing financial services does during the year that we can do it and know probably there'll be some component of it that may not happen exactly like we plan. The real focus when we do the forecast is on years 1 and 2. Obviously, it's more accurate in the earlier years. The further out you go, there's more uncertainty that exists. We use a variety of information. Some of that information is internal. Some of it is third-party information. Also recognize that several items included as assumptions in the forecast will be discussed with the Commission in much more detail prior to execution. Our presentation today and the item that I will do during the open commission meeting is for informational purposes only. So we will not be asking for your approval today, but we will seek your approval at the point that you approve the STIP and when you approve the budgets. There is kind of 2 components to this forecast. First, we have the base forecasting, which is the state revenues, the federal revenues, and our regular spending. And then we have fairly significant one-time sources of funding for very specific purposes. And we'll be talking about both of those. The lowest cash balance in the State Road Fund is in year 2030 in the amount of $463.4 million. We do try to maintain a cash balance of at least $250 million for cash flow purposes. There is a requirement in the Constitution about keeping a certain amount, but it only applied to our senior lien bonds, and since those were paid off in February of 2023, that requirement is no longer needed. The higher cash balance in 2030 is related to an assumption having to do with a bond issuance, and that bond issuance would only occur if conditions warrant. So we start the forecast where we ended fiscal year 23. So for state revenues, we started with the 2023 actuals, which were $57.2 million more than projected in last year's forecast. Motor fuel tax for fiscal year 23 was $15.3 million less than we projected. Motor vehicle sales tax, the fiscal year 23 actuals was $25.7 million more than projected a year ago. Yes, people are buying cars. Motor vehicle and driver's licensing fees, fiscal year 23 actuals was $10.6 million more than projected. Interest rates we're seeing interest rates rise. fiscal year 23 actuals for interest was 3.5 million more than projected. And our miscellaneous revenue, that's when we sell excess property or excess equipment, or when we partner with someone for a project and they provide us their share of the money, that's the miscellaneous revenue. That was 32.6 million more than projected. Our operating expenditures, we actually start with the fiscal year 24 budget. That's a little over $1 billion. The cash balance of the State Road Fund, the State Highways and Transportation Department Fund, and the State Road Bond Fund at June 30th was just under $1.8 billion. As of the end of December, it's still about a little under $1.8 billion. So we're going to talk about each of the three primary state revenue sources. And on each of these graphs, we're going to show you the actual revenues from 2012 through 2023, and then compare the forecast we're presenting today to the forecast that we presented last year. The blue line is actuals, the red line is last year's forecast, and the green line is this year's forecast. So I talked about for motor fuel taxes, we're first going to look at motor fuel taxes excluding Senate Bill 262 so that we can compare apples all the way across. Fiscal year 23 actuals were 17.1 million less than what we projected. And as you can see in the graph, fiscal year 2022, and that is, that didn't show up on the screen, was the largest amount of motor fuel taxes, or the highest amount of revenue that we received for motor fuel taxes at 526.9 million. Moving forward, based on the first 5 months of fiscal year 24, we think motor fuel taxes will begin a slow decline. For motor fuel taxes, we look at the corporate average fuel economy CAFE standards, as well as historical data and fuel consumption projections from the U.S. Energy Information Administration's Annual Energy Outlook. And we're just going to call that the Annual Energy Outlook because that's a mouthful for this region. So for this forecast, we assume a decrease of 0.2% for fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 26, and a decrease of 0.25% for fiscal year 27 and beyond. And this is a similar assumption as what we had last year, with the exception of fiscal year 2026. Last year, we assumed a decrease of 0.2% for fiscal year 26. This year, it's going to be, no, it's the other way around. Fiscal year 26, we changed the assumption for it. I do think it's very interesting if you look at the map and you look at the graph and you kind of look at 2019 to 2022 and 2022. If you take that out and connect that blue line to that green line, it follows a trend. And you're going to see this on each of the graphs. You can really tell the impact of the pandemic and the impact it had on our revenues. So then looking at motor fuel taxes for Senate Bill 262, this was passed by the General Assembly in fiscal year 2021 and signed into law by the governor in July of 2021. It increases the motor fuel tax 12.5 cents over 5 years at 2.5 cents per year. And this graph shows the projection related to the Senate Bill 262 motor fuel taxes. Similar assumptions were made for this portion of the motor fuel tax as it was for the others that I just talked about. This slide shows the revenue net of refunds, as well as net of the constitutional distributions to cities and counties. So this is only the portion that comes to the state. I'd like to talk just a little bit more about refunds. So when we started forecasting the Senate Bill 262 revenues, the unknown component was refunds. And so now we have essentially 2 years worth of information on the refunds. For fiscal year 23, refunds totaled just under $434,000. For fiscal year 24, it was $547,000. And based upon that actual refund information, we have assumed refunds of 1% for 2024 and beyond. We think it's going to be right around there. The overall impact comparing last year's forecast to this year's forecast is $30.7 million more for Senate Bill 262 motor fuel taxes. For motor vehicle sales tax, for fiscal year 2023, actuals were $25.7 million more than we projected. People are continuing to buy vehicles, and the vehicles they're buying are more expensive. For this forecast, we use historical information and, again, information from that annual energy outlook. For this forecast, we started with the fiscal year 23 actuals and then grew them 3% for fiscal year 2024 and beyond. This is the same assumption that we used last year. And again, if you take out 2018 to 2022, the blue line connects directly to the green line. So it follows the same trend. Motor vehicle and driver's fees, it is similar to motor vehicle sales tax. You'll see kind of a similar trend line there. These fees were $10.6 million more than projected in fiscal year 2023. The information we use to project this is historical data, population over the age of 16, projections from that annual energy outlook, and driver's license renewal data from the Department of Revenue. So we use the same assumption as we did last year, which is projecting a 1.5% growth for fiscal year 2024 and beyond. Again, you can kind of take out the looks like about 2020 through 2022. Again, you see that trend line follows pretty true through there. The overall impact for this is $56.3 million more in this forecast compared to last year's forecast. So in this graph, we compare how the state revenue projections for all state revenue in this forecast compares to last year's forecast. The red line represents last year's forecast. The blue line is this year's forecast. And the difference between those two lines is $123.5 million more. In addition to the three primary revenue sources, this chart also includes interest projections. So we're beginning to see interest rates rise. They're right around 3%. And so that is the assumption that we have made there. Miscellaneous revenue is also included here. Again, those are when we sell surplus property, when we sell surplus equipment. That assumption for those incidental type expenditures is about $45 million. And then there are the fees related to partnering projects, which can vary from year to year. The overall impact, again, is $123.5 million more. Federal revenue includes the federal funds for our construction projects, as well as federal funds we receive for preventive maintenance, design work, construction engineering, statewide planning and research, reimbursements, and federal funds that we are required to pass on to local entities. Again, we're showing a comparison between last year's forecast and this year's forecast. The federal funding changes, the timing of it changes a little bit, and as a result, this forecast has $170.6 million more than last year's forecast. So this includes the formula funds, so everything that was appropriated through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, those programs. It includes the monies that gets passed on to local entities. The annual allocation for that is $232.5 million annually, and then there's $194 million of carryover from previous years. There are things like preventive maintenance, so we can get federal reimbursement for some of our activities like striping and chip seal and so forth.
So this graph shows the picture for all resources available for state revenues, federal revenues, and Amendment 3 bond proceeds. As part of this forecast, assumptions, if future conditions warrant the issuance, includes Amendment 3 bond issuances in 2026, 2028, and 2030 in the amount of $500 million to use up the revenues that are deposited into the State Road Bond Fund. That is kind of the intent or the purpose of that fund. This graph does not include those one-time funding that was made available either by the governor and the General Assembly or the Improve I-70 program. Todd's going to talk a little bit more about those in a couple of slides. So this year's forecast has $821.8 million more in resources available than the previous forecast. And the major difference is the Amendment 3 issuance of bonds in 2028. And that's if conditions warrant that. So that kind of wraps up the first part of the revenues. Are there any questions before I turn it over to Todd to begin to talk about the disbursement side? Okay, I'll turn it over to Todd.
All right, thank you, Brenda. This chart also only has state road fund money on this one too, and shows the impact of it. Brenda just talked about the red line on this chart. That's the revenue. I'll be going into a little more detail, the blue line. Then the green line at the bottom, that's the cash balance at the end of those fiscal years. It shows the impact of this spending and the revenue coming into it. Total disbursements averaged $3.8 billion from 25 to 29. The operating budget, which makes up 30% of this total spending, or $1.2 billion. That's where we pay our salaries and our wages, our personal services. 32% of our operating budget, or $370 million. This spending includes the continued implementation of the market plan for our employees, additional staff in 2025 of 345 employees. Majority of those employees are with safety and operations to meet customer expectations, and in our program delivery area to deliver this large construction program. Also in 2025, we have an annual cost of living adjustment of 4%. And for 2026, we have the hiring of additional 200 employees to continue to address safety and customer service needs for the department. And for 26 and each year thereafter, we have cost of living adjustments of 2%. Now, those cost of living adjustments are put in there as placeholders, and we understand, we know that that would have to come back to the commission and have to be approved by the General Assembly and all that. But that's just in the forecast. That's how we take care of that, just in case in those outer years. Fringe benefits is 29% of our operating budget, or roughly $334 million. For every $1 of personal services, there's 90 cents of a fringe benefit on that. Retirement makes up 52 cents, medical's 27, and then the remaining 11 cents is workers' comp, Social Security, and unemployment. This forecast also includes a $1.5 million increase for medical and life benefits for retirees. And starting in 2026, we have an annual growth rate of 12% for medical benefits based on our actuarial report that's provided to us. Expense and equipment, you'll hear that referred to as E&E. That's where our materials and our supplies that we purchase. That's the remaining 39% of our operating budget, or roughly $455 million. This includes increases for operations contracts to help supplement our own employees to help meet customer expectations. It also includes an annual growth rate of 2.5% to help offset some of the inflation that we have to deal with. And waste station and rest area improvements are included in this also. Now, the majority of our spending comes in the program delivery area, 59%, or $2.2 billion annually. And that's where we pay our contractors. That's 68% of this number, or $1.5 billion. Now, the contractor payments are a summation of our active construction projects that we, later today, you'll be awarding contracts. And then as those start to pay out, all those active construction contracts, some pay out very quickly. A resurfacing project could pay out in one construction season or a summer, or a major bridge project like the Roachport Bridge. It could take multiple years. So we have to put curves on those and payouts and determine exactly how that gets paid out over the life of those projects. The payments are based on the contractor awards of $1.68 billion in 2025, and then the other years from 26 to 29 is $1.41 billion. And this is the same as last year's forecast had too. Brenda mentioned the local public agencies. On the revenue side, it's a revenue and it's an expenditure. It passes through the organization. So that's about 13% of the program delivery amount. And again, these are federal funds that are suballocated to the urban areas for city improvements. This is where the county bridge program is paid through the department. We're responsible for these programs, for the administration of them. And the cities and counties send us the invoices. We in turn go to Federal Highway and get reimbursement and pass it back to them. Hence the name pass-through MODOT. The design bridge consultant engineering costs are about 5% of this program delivery amount. And these are payments to the engineering firms for roadway and bridge plans so we can build projects. That's about $110 million annually. Right-of-way acquisitions, 1% of this total. This is payments to the landowners to secure right-of-way for construction. That's about $30 million annually. We also have utilities and other payments. These are utility payments to relocate services so we can build the roads. And then other payments are for like the transportation management centers that we have in our urban areas. Those together is about $22 million a year. The last category for program delivery is our debt service. And this is the repayment of our borrowed funds from bonding. We currently have $1.8 billion in bonds outstanding. And as Brenda mentioned, this forecast includes the repayments for proposed Amendment 3 issuances of $500 million in 26, 28, and 30 should future conditions merit this action. The last disbursement out of this that I need to mention is the other state agencies. That's a remaining 11%, or about $428 million a year. We base this on historical data, how much these agencies or these departments spend of their appropriation. The majority of it goes to the Highway Patrol, 91% of this total, and then the remaining is Department of Revenue for them to collect these taxes. So our total disbursements are $1.2 billion more for this 5-year period from 25 to 29 compared to last year's forecast. And as you can see, the green line there, the state road fund balance starts at $1.4 billion in 24 and then declines down to $463 million by 2030. Deficit spending averages $176 million per year. And the increased disbursements of this $1.2 billion are offset by the increased revenue that Brenda talked about of roughly $822 million and fund balances. Now, Brenda mentioned this, we've separated this because this is all highway user fees as we project it. Now, the other, which I call manna from heaven, general revenue coming for transportation for your new commissioners, this is manna from heaven for a guy that's been here 35 years and all we've had is state highway user fees. General revenue for transportation is incredible as far as I'm concerned, and I'm all for it. That's what this chart shows, the Improve I-70 program, and then the General Assembly designated and funded projects. The Improve I-70 program, that includes the $1.4 billion of general revenue and $1.4 billion of bond proceeds for contractor payments, and also the $136 million annually for debt service. In the General Assembly designated and funded projects, that's general revenue for low volume roads of $100 million. And the I-55 outer service road in Jefferson County of $12 million. And then the Jefferson Avenue Community Footbridge in Springfield of $8 million. So this shows the revenue coming in and the disbursements going out for that. And this chart here, the contractor awards has pulled all that together, the state road fund and these other funded items here. So the overall awards for this forecast are the same as the prior year forecast. It's 1.97 billion per year. And the annual amounts have been changed a little bit just based on the current project schedules. But overall, the number is the same, but you'll see a little bit of variation from year to year on that. So that's the disbursements overview I have prepared. Are there any questions about it in any of that? Okay, well, I'll turn it back over to Brenda.
We thought we would take just a little bit different look. This pie chart shows where all the funding included in this forecast comes from. By far, the largest amount is from federal funds at 36%. Of the three primary revenue sources, motor fuel tax provides the most at 20%. And you can see that huge investment of other state resources with that bright yellow slice at 15% for the Improve I-70 program and the General Assembly designated and funded projects. We originally thought we would do a comparison chart to compare to what this looked like last year, but they essentially look the same. So it wasn't going to add much information. Oops. Okay. In your materials, you should have a pie chart that shows disbursements. The distribution of disbursement, the largest portion is for the construction program at 44%. The next largest category is the operating budget, which includes all the state road fund, personal services, fringe benefits, and expense and equipment. This is our investment in customer service that we provide Missourians. Again, the bright yellow slice at 14% is for the Improve I-70 program and the General Assembly designated and funded projects. Some of the highway user fees are appropriated to the two other state agencies. That's per the Constitution, Department of Revenue, and the Missouri State Highway Patrol. That is at 10% of the disbursement. And lastly, the debt service at 6%. And again, the distribution of those disbursements is very similar to last year, so we did not provide a comparison there. So that is the financial forecast that we have to present to you today. We would be more than glad to answer any questions you have about any of the information we presented.
Anybody have any questions? Commissioner Erdman?
Yeah, as always, Brenda, great job. Patrick knows, everybody knows, I've always been interested in the operating budget. And I see here that for the forecast, we're looking at disbursements on the operating side of 26%. And I'm kind of curious, if you were to look at that average over a span of 5 years or so, what would that have looked like maybe 5 years ago? And what's the trend line? I think you know where I'm going with this probably.
Yeah, actually, to respond to that, I'd actually go back a little bit further.
Okay.
And when I came here about 8 years ago now, I asked for a look back at 15 years. And what we had seen is an absolute flat line of the operating budget over that 15-year period, not an increase.
At what level?
Percentage? Percentage-wise, probably a little bit less than where it is now. It's still close to 20-25%. The thing that skews it right now in the immediate term is the general revenue infusion for I-70. But the lack of growth in that account, even to account for inflation, was really strangling the department and resulting in less services that are provided. Keep in mind, a lot of our operating budget covers the maintenance on things like low volume roads. Many of those roads, over 5,000 miles of them that we maintain, aren't eligible for federal reimbursement. So that is all borne on the operating budget. as is the case for another 6,000 or 7,000 miles of roadways. So the capital budget that you see is taking care of the highest volume roadways in our state, and the operating budget takes care of the rest. So that similar constraint, and essentially what we're trying to do is find that balance between drawing in all federal funds, making sure that we do that, and that created, when we were losing against inflation for those years, that created a higher percentage of the total resource going to the capital budget necessarily to pull the federal funds in, and the operating budget was always the last at the trough, if you will. Now, that can happen for a year or two, but over a sustained period of time, it really has an impact. And what we're seeing now in recent times is we've been attempting to layer in, at the commission's instruction, additional resources to take care of those very customer service issues that we know are creating issues for elected officials with the responses that they get from constituents, our own forces for that. And so we're trying to find that balance. And we have, in this budget period and in this forecast, are showing a fairly significant increase in resources, particularly as Todd mentioned, 345 additional FTEs, if you will, positions available. And that puts us about at par with what our staffing level was 5 years ago. So it's not a tremendous growth. It's kind of a catch-up period of time. But we still find that balance. And I would say that in general, the tilt of this organization has been toward capital, not so much toward operating. But we find that I think we have, this is moving a tanker. We are shifting so that we find a more appropriate balance between service and the capital program. At the same time, we're trying to maintain our assets so that they last as long as they can for the taxpayers that have funded them.
Well, I don't want anything to be interpreted from my comment that I don't want to fully draw federal funds, because
Right.
I certainly do.
That's right.
That said, since my orientation, I've talked a lot about, I think we need to address the operating side of the house that has suffered going back over a decade now.
Right.
I'm not exactly sure how we do it, but I hope in 2024 we can kind of see a roadmap where the operating side, the maintenance at the railroad, this is a very big, would be a very high priority without putting into jeopardy any federal fund drawdown.
Yeah, and we, as I mentioned previously, not in this setting, we did have first opportunity to present our budget through the legislative process with the House last month. And I would say that the reception to those increases was I would say mixed, but mixed more to the flavor of concern about adding employees to the mix. And the same thing that you're saying you support, I would say, was received with questions and more information needed.
So there's
through
skepticism about the need to
That's right.
fill vacant positions.
Well, we do have vacant positions, and I'd say the line of questioning was mostly related to the fact that because we have vacancy, why are we asking for additional resources on top? Is it likely that we can accomplish all of that in a single fiscal year? And I think that's a reasonable set of questions. And I think that would be a stretch for us to say that we could accomplish all of that. But when we were formulating the budget at the commission's request and with your feedback, we did try, as we've mentioned, if we go back and look at just 5 years ago, we paid for almost 2 million labor hours more than we paid this past year. And that's directly hitting our customer service areas. So the budget is a plan to reconstruct those labor hours and to bring that service level back. And that's what we presented. Certainly there's give and take through the budget process to determine what that balance is between commission's view and the legislative view, and we're going to be doing that over the next several months.
Then one last thing, contributions to the retirement plan come out of this operating budget.
They do.
So any savings that were achieved by improved conditions at the retirement plan would fall to the operating budget.
It would. Pretty
Good.
considerable too.
Yes.
You know, and you know, acknowledging that last year in this budget there was a 58-cent per dollar of payroll contribution to the retirement fund, and it's now budgeted at 52. That's a move in the right direction,
Right.
and 6 cents per dollar of payroll relief to the
That's-
fund. It's significant.
So, comment, Patrick. So like when I came on, our, see if I have this right, our asset management is what you're kind of talking about, was like at 400 some million. And we, as a commission, improved that to 650 million, I believe.
Yep.
And that was going towards this operating part, right?
The asset management primarily is going to the capital side of the house, and that's what's grown a little faster necessarily. We had a static amount based on commission policy that was
That's right. Yeah.
over about 15 years old, where we had a single dollar amount that was going to asset management. And what that was is, at the time that the distribution was set, there was a calculation of what the cost of asset management was. So, you know, how much would it take to maintain the assets that we have at the condition we have and to maintain them going forward? That hadn't risen with inflation, and that was creating a lot of pressure on our districts, because the formulas that we have set up, one for asset management is about the size of the system, and the ones for economic growth are about the maybe the population and the use of the system. So they're slightly different formulas, and it was skewing the distribution of funds because we weren't inflating the cost of asset management. You set that on a path where we adjusted up that year that you mentioned. I think it was 2018. We did that, and because of the way that the funding works, it didn't take effect until 2021, which was a source of frustration, I know, for this commission. But the only way that we're able to continue to fulfill our commitments to projects for the communities is to do this forecast and to allocate those funds and to fill up those estimates for 3 years, 100%. So we allocate all the resources that we have available for 3 years. So it's only in that fourth year, if you make a change in policy, if you want to add projects, it's into that fourth year, and it's a rolling basis each year. That doesn't enable us maybe to move as quickly as some would like, but it also enables us to fulfill commitments rather than jumping from one priority to another all the time. So it's a matter of kind of getting used to that process in the financial forecast. Understand that a big part of this gets committed over the next 6 months. The first 3 years, 25, 26, and 27 will be committed. If there's something you want to change as a commission, because last year's commitment was 24, 25, and 26, the first year that would become available is in 27. Things like changes that we've made to cost share and some of those other things. And believe me, that I share that frustration, but I also support the process because it really is the only way to do the project development cycle that is pretty considerable. The engineering, the right of way, we don't just roll in and take people's land. We have to go through a process to do that, and it's important to build that into the timetable so that our professional engineers and planners can notify communities, work with communities, and work out the issues before we get to construction. And that's really what we're committing to, is these construction periods. That's when the public gets the benefit, is when we complete the construction. But it is I will grant you, it is the most significant challenge we face, is allocation of resources among the regions and the split between managing the assets that exist and running the operation that provides direct services. That's a tricky balance that we've tried to reach. Very difficult in times with lesser funds, and we feel like we're moving or trending in the right direction on all fronts right now for probably the first time in a long time.
Any other questions? On the forecast for the federal revenue decreasing in the later years, is that related to anything to do with the Federal Highways Act or legislation, or is that just,
Actually, our forecast, because of the timing, there's actually about 176 million more than the previous year's forecast. So there were some projects that probably didn't pay out in 2023 that are going to pay out in later years. So it's actually over the forecast period, there's actually more federal funds.
So to explain that just a little bit differently, so we have an allocation of federal funds that comes from the surface transportation bill. But what is really important about what Brenda and Todd and their team and Janelle Lucanati is here, and I want to thank Janelle because she does a lot of work on this. What they do is they tie these to specific reimbursements on projects that are underway or scheduled or estimated. Todd mentioned that he kind of, we have a beginning phase, middle phase, and an end to every project. So we have 1,500 funded projects in our current STIP. And over that payout period of time, they're estimating among all of those projects what the payout of the federal reimbursement will be and the timing. So really this, because the federal bill hasn't changed, it's very similar, and it's just the timing of those payouts on the projects.
Thank you.
Is that
Any other questions?
okay? Good. I checked. Brenda said I said that okay, so we're good.
All right. If there's no more questions, then this is a non-action item, so there's no further business at this time that we need to address in this workshop. So we're going to take a brief recess, and we will reconvene at 3 o'clock for our open session in this room. Thank you. So we are recessed.